Well, thank you so much, Lainey. That really got us into our next session and getting us ready for our keynote speaker. Before we present our keynote speaker, I just want to introduce a special guest who's just joined us and who will be introducing our Congresswoman. Elected to the United States Senate in 2006, she's the second woman in American history to be elected both governor and U.S. Senator. She served on the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committees, as well as the Senate Finance Committee, where she's been particularly focused on expanding access to quality, affordable health care and boosting treatment for substance misuse. She's joining us today from Washington, where she participated in the move-in ceremonies honoring the late Justice Ginsburg at the Capitol yesterday. And now, without further aside, I'll introduce you to our Senator, Senator Maggie Hassan.
Well, thank you so much, Jerry Ann, and good day, good afternoon to everybody participating. What a wonderful event. And Jerry Ann, I just want to take a moment to thank you for your work. It makes our state and our country stronger and more just. And I was so honored to be able to recognize you and Valerie Cunningham for your work founding the Black Heritage Trail, first in Portsmouth, and now, of course, it's a statewide New Hampshire trail. It's just critical to help Granite Staters and all Americans further understand their history and the work that we all still have to do. And I am so honored to be with all of you to participate in this year's conference because it's such an important opportunity to celebrate the leadership and immense contributions of Black women all across our region. It's also an opportunity to discuss the work ahead to build a country that provides more opportunity, equality, and justice for Black Americans. And I will take a moment just to say, for those of you who haven't watched the ceremony at the Capitol for Justice Ginsburg yesterday, I thought the rabbi's comments provided an important reflection on what it means to work for justice and what Justice Ginsburg's work meant in that context. I found it very moving, and I found the whole ceremony very moving, but in particular, I felt a little bit like Justice Ginsburg was telling us all through the rabbi to dust ourselves off, pick ourselves up, and keep working. And so I'd recommend it to everybody. And speaking of people who fight for justice, my role today is really to introduce one of our country's leaders and visionaries and stalwarts. Today's keynote speaker is at the forefront of the fight for justice. As the first woman of color, first elected to city council, and the first woman of color elected to Congress in Massachusetts, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is breaking down barriers for women all across our region, to be sure, but across our country. She has spent her career in public service working to expand opportunity, and her fight is against the inequalities that persist in our communities. In Congress, Congresswoman Pressley has been a champion for justice. She is leading on issues including workers' rights, reproductive freedom, and protecting survivors of sexual assault and harassment. And I am grateful in particular for her work that highlights the impact of systemic racism on public health, obviously a critical and important issue during the pandemic. She is fighting to lift up communities across our country whose needs and priorities have been overlooked and have been left behind. We get stronger in our country when we bring in people who have been discriminated against or marginalized in one way or the other. When we unleash and free everybody's talent and energy, then we are truly unstoppable. And Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is working to do just that. So it is my great honor, Congresswoman, to introduce you, and I look forward to your comments so much. Thank you all very much. Be safe.
Thank you, Senator, for that warm introduction. And Thank you for your leadership example and your partnership on so many social justice issues. And, good afternoon. It is really glorious to be with all of you today. The day after the unjust and devastating grand jury ruling in the Breonna Taylor case, I had the blessing to participate in a virtual convening with Oprah Winfrey about getting the vote out. And there were 5 other women joining me for that convening, and every single one of us was wearing yellow. It was not planned. It was not planned by us, but I do believe it was divinely ordered. And it was our innate collective spiritual response to the darkness of the day before. And so in many ways, I feel like today's convening is a continuation of that. So I want to thank you for holding space for the collective pain in the room, as well as our collective power, our brilliance, and here comes the yellow part, and our joy. This week, we have faced painful reminders that Black women are not valued. We are not protected and supported in America. And yet, still, we rise. We are the backbones of a nation that has not yet recognized our full humanity. Now, the irony there is that Black women, now I would never give short shrift to Black girl magic, but I know a lot more about Black woman work. And we have been putting it in for a long time. I know that's true for my mother, may she rest in peace and power, who made sure I knew early on that as beautiful as it is to be Black, and as proud as I should be to be Black, that I was being born into a struggle, a continuous struggle. And she had an expectation that I would do my part in that struggle. So Black women have been the table shakers. We have been the disruptors. We have been the truth tellers. We have been the preservers of democracy. And we have done the work in the pursuit of the collective liberation and full emancipation of everyone, even when that equitable hand of freedom has not been extended to us. So we don't need anyone's permission to lead. We've been doing it. But it's past time that our contributions and the historic role that we've played is recognized. It's time that our voices and our issues are centered, not only on the campaign trail, but in the very rooms where decisions are being made long after the elections are over. All too often, the faces of those in the corridors of power do not reflect the faces of the folks doing the hard work of organizing and mobilizing day in and day out. I am very humbled to serve in the United States House of Representatives. I think something like less than 11,000 people have done that in our history. And so it might surprise you when I say, in some ways, giving short shrift to the power of Congress, that Congress and the Senate like to take the credit, but the work is done by the people. Change does not come from Congress. It does not come from the Senate. It comes to Congress. It comes to the Senate. It's all about the power of the people. And so that's why I'm so proud and excited to see the Black women who have been doing the work behind the scenes for a long time, running and winning positions of power. And might I just also add, Black women stepping up and standing in the gap of a failed federal response to meet the scale and scope of this pandemic, who have been stepping up and not only as foot soldiers and architects of movements, but also in practicing mutual aid and collective care and creating our own systems to support one another. So that's because Black women have always understood that our freedoms and our destinies, our humanity and our freedoms are tied. And in this moment, it is all on the line. So here we have a White House that has encouraged and emboldened white supremacy and done lasting damage to our most vulnerable communities. And we find ourselves in this unprecedented moment with an uncertain landscape, bearing the weight of 3 crises: the dual public health and economic crises brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the only thing that COVID-19 could not kill: systemic and structural racism and police brutality. None of this is new. These are old fights. but I hope that we are ushering in a new day. The fact of the matter is that these inequities have existed for far too long. And by the way, they are not naturally occurring injustices and disparities and inequities. More often than not, they have been legislated, codified through lawmaking. So we have legislated hate, hurt, and harm. And I do believe that we can legislate healing, equity, and justice. At the end of the day, we're going to have to build something, a brand new world, and I do believe it's within our reach, and it is possible, because the status quo normal, which predated this moment in time, was insufficient, unjust, and inadequate to begin with. Reverend Barber continually reminds us that this is a moment of reckoning that demands of us a third reconstruction. And so I'm enlisting all of you as community builders in that work. And I know we can do it, because at the end of the day, despite the gravity of the challenges before us, the impacts of and the comorbidities of structural racism and systemic oppression, our greatness is older than our oppression. Now let that sink in. For centuries, we have stood in the gap as the preservers and defenders of our families, of our communities, and our democracy. And this year is no different. Black women have been on the front lines as healthcare workers and essential workers. We have organized mutual aid organizations to take care of our neighbors in the face of an administration that has left us to fend for ourselves. We are nation builders. We are table shakers. We are leaders. And the fact of the matter is, when we show up in force, we have the power to usher in bold, transformative policies that will fundamentally transform our society into one that is more equitable and more just. A society where Breonna Taylor would still be alive. A society where dignified work is affirmed by a federal jobs guarantee. A society where a Green New Deal is passed to finally address the crisis of environmental racism policies, and also housing policies that actually meet the scale and scope of the hurt and harm that our communities have been experiencing for centuries. A new world, a just world, is possible if we work for it together. A world that replaces our oppression with liberation and our hurt with healing. Now, to make that world a reality, we must be precise and prescriptive in our policy making. Policy is my love language, because through policy changes, we have the ability to achieve societal change. Now, I need each of you to make a plan. As my grandfather used to say, plan your work and work your plan.
Yes.
And Black women know how to make a plan. I think we might have the longest to-do list of anyone. So make a plan to vote right now by going to iwillvote.com, and there you can find specific information on voter registration and also early voting in your state. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also say, and complete your census, because in the eyes of the federal government, if you are not seen, if you are not counted, then you don't count. And you matter to me. And I want you to get the federal investment that you deserve. So complete your census, go to iwillvote.com. And for those of you who show up, who reliably to every election, my mother used to say being a super voter is our superpower. So for those of you who already do that and who have logged on to this conference, you may be thinking, sis, we know all this already. You don't need to boost us. You're preaching to the choir. But why else would I preach to the choir? Because I need you to sing. We are powerful together when we organize, when we mobilize, when we work together. There's nothing we can't accomplish. We know this is about power, self-agency, and determination, and we don't organize just for an election. We organize to build community. We organize to build power. Now, it is understandable to sit in the heaviness of circumstances, and I'm wearing my arrest. Let me bring Brianna into this room. You know, it is understandable to sit in the heaviness of circumstances, but I also want to give us permission to dream if it is possible. You know, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, and we are the manifestations of generations of folks who dreamed of a world they couldn't yet see. And we have got to keep our eyes fixed on possibility and move in our power. One more thing, and this today is certainly doing that for me, because we talk so much about all the armor that we have to put on to negotiate and navigate a world that does not value us. From microaggressions to brutality to murder, inequities in how we're paid. Sometimes our labor is valued, but very rarely are our lives valued. But the thing I think we don't talk enough about is joy. And joy is an act of resistance too. And when people are coming for everything, every gain that we've realized because of the power of movement building, when they are coming, it's like this fire hose of insult and assault that we are drinking from, and they are coming for our civil rights and our civil liberties and our bodily autonomy and the livability of our planet and our very humanity and our peace of mind. Do not give them your joy too. Be intentional in informing your joy and share it. So I want to thank you all for holding space today for this powerful convening. Thank you for building virtual community. Thank you for being the visionaries to bring us together today. And count me as your sister in solidarity and in service and your continued partner in the work of the upliftment of community and the unapologetic advancement of Black women.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Pressley. We appreciate your words today. In particular, you're reminding us about how important it is for us to keep our joy. When you say that joy is an act of resistance too, I think so much about what we see a lot on social media. For those of us who are tapped in on the Facebook and on Instagram, it's very easy, I think, to get mired into the heaviness of it all, the Breonna Taylor ruling and just what's been happening 2020 in general, and just the history of, I would say, state-sanctioned violence against Black bodies and Black people.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult to carry. And so I think I speak for everyone here, the reminders of, the wearing yellow, that our greatness is older than our oppression, and all of this. I thank you and value that, and those inspiring and uplifting words. For everyone who is on this conference, if you have any questions for Congresswoman Pressley, please put that in the chat and head it with question and then insert your question so it's easier for me to be able to see that and pose those questions. In the meantime, can you talk to us a little bit about the button that you have on your jacket, what that says and what that means?
Oh, sisters don't miss a beat. People asking about that in the chat. I'm a big believer in statement T-shirts, which is why I'm wearing Arrest the Cops That Killed Breonna Taylor T-shirt today, and I have these solidarity pins that I wear very often, and this one just says "Free Black Mamas." This is about my efforts and my work around abolition and decarceration, and just the acknowledgement that we have more Black girls justice involved. More Black women and Black mamas incarcerated than ever before. And so there's a lot of work that I've been doing legislatively to stop that, to stop the destabilization and the separation of family, and to stop us as a society from treating trauma with more trauma. So that's what the button says, Free Black Mamas.
Oh, thank you so much. Would you mind, so I have a question with all of the Black Lives Matters movements that's been occurring, and we know that it started with Trayvon Martin and the women that started that movement with the unjust, and I would say unjust again, ruling that no one was going to be held accountable for his murder. Can you talk to us a little bit about your take on the Black Lives Movement and how it started and sort of where it's landed now? Right now we have more of a global sense of it, and we have our brothers and sisters in other countries embracing it. What does that look like for you and your politics, and what does that mean for us as Black people living in America, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, the Black Lives Matter movement is the civil rights movement. The Black Lives Matter movement is the progressive movement. Again, Black Americans have been doing the work on the front lines to get us closer to the full, to equality, to the full emancipation, collective liberation of all people. Every piece of progressive legislation that we've passed, from the Voting Rights Act to the Civil Rights Act to Medicare, and I could go on, the civil rights movement was the blueprint for that, which is to organize and to mobilize and then to legislate. And so I see BLM really as a continuation of that. And then because I only know how to be me, let me be fully transparent and truth-telling and say that, you know, the fact that this is a movement that was founded by and is headed by Black, queer, and trans women, I think also speaks to the fact that our activist space have often been very elitist and very exclusionary, and really holding space for one sort of lived experience. And so I just want to also just hold space for that and acknowledge how extraordinary and overdue that is. So this isn't a moment, this is a movement. It's unprecedented mobilization. I love that the leadership of it is not centralized. It's decentralized on purpose. You know, my dear sister, Brittany Packnett Cunningham, when we were debating the other day about this scarcity mindset that we get into often as legislators and policymakers and thought leaders. And she said, you know, we think power is this really finite thing, but it's actually infinite. It's abundant because it lives in all of us. And so that's what I really do believe that the BLM movement embodies. So, you know, the cameras may leave, the headlines may fade, but this movement is strong. You know, from mutual aid to feeding our neighbors to fighting for legislation that will save lives, those on the front lines of this movement, they've transformed the conversation and built a powerful coalition. So we have to stay disciplined in our practice and continue to organize. But I can wear a button that says Free Black Mamas, and we can have a national conversation about radically reimagining what safe communities look like. I can introduce legislation like counseling, not criminalization in our schools. You know, I can do that because of the culture shift that the Black Lives Matter movement has ushered in. And so now that has to translate into a power shift and then also a policy shift.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. We have a question coming up. And this individual is wondering if you could speak to us more about what you had said about change coming to Congress rather than from Congress. It's a very important point that you made, and so we would like to just get a little bit more, dig a little bit deeper into that.
And listen, I don't want anyone to get this wrong, okay? As the first person of color and the first Black woman to represent the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the House of Representatives in 230 years, I would never give short shrift to the power of Congress, and certainly the power of representation. But what I seek to do and what I believe is that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. And so the work of Congress is only as good as the will of the people. The reason we still have an Affordable Care Act is not because of the convictions of lawmakers. It's because of the courage of everyday people that laid their bodies on the line and demanded that someone see their humanity. So that's what I mean when I say change comes to Congress. You know, ultimately, this is about the will of the people. That's why even in the midst of, you know, very challenging times, I still am optimistic because I believe so fiercely in the power of us. And the people have been, these last 4 years in particular, you know, and under this climate, you know, it's a struggle to advance those things that would make a more equitable and just world. But we've been able to stop a lot of things. You know, when you're at a moment like this, it may not be what you advance, but there's something to be said for also what we've been able to stop. We were able to keep that citizenship status question off of the census. That's because people organized. And I could go on with many other victories that were made possible because of movement building. So that's what I mean when I say change does not come from Congress, it comes to Congress. So keep organizing, keep mobilizing, and keep voting, because I see voting, and I know there's a lot of emphasis on the top of the ticket, but as someone who served on the Boston City Council for 8 years, you have to vote in every single election. If you're serious about radically reimagining our criminal legal system, you need to care about who your police chiefs and commissioners are. You need to care about who your district attorneys are. After the ruling from 3 days ago, you know you need to care about who your attorney generals are. You need to care about who your mayors are. So it's important that we are participating in every election, because I see the vote as the resistance too. When you cast that ballot, you are resisting these draconian, discriminatory, hurtful, and cruel policies, while also affirming that I'm going to elect people that are going to do something about the murders of Black trans women. I'm going to elect people that are going to do something about the Black maternal mortality crisis. I'm going to elect people that are going to do something about this eviction tsunami that will be disproportionately borne by Black women. I'm going to elect people that will do something about the growing push out crisis and the criminalization of Black girls in our schools simply for how we show up in the world. So the vote is the resistance and it's the affirmation.
Thank you for that, Congresswoman Pressley. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and just talk a little bit about, gender and how that shows up in Congress. Given the recent occurrences with AOC and some of the comments that were made against her, some of the very targeted comments against her by her colleagues, her male colleagues in particular, how are you finding, and this is based on one of the questions in the chat right now, how are you finding the environment as a Black woman, particularly coming from other Congress people or congressmen who may share your racial identity or background?
Sure. Well, let me just, acknowledge the obvious. Just because you earn a comma and a title after your name doesn't mean that you stop experiencing misogyny and racism, microaggressions, or more combative and covert exchanges and experiences. And so that certainly continues to be true. Representative Ocasio-Cortez spoke very eloquently to that on the House floor. And we speak about that often, myself and my colleagues and my cohorts, in particular, those of color, because our identities and that which allows us to govern uniquely and authentically has been weaponized. And so it has been hard, it has been challenging, but it's nothing new. Thank God I've been born with, broad shoulders and a strong back. So, shout out to those Pressley genes. But it certainly is, it's challenging. But I would just say that I try not to take the bait and to get distracted, because yes, rhetoric is hurtful. And in fact, it can often lead to dynamics that endanger our lives. The amount of online vitriol and credible death threats that we receive are high. But I try to just remain focused on the policies, the policy violence, not the violent rhetoric, but the policy violence, because that's why I ran for Congress. I represent a district that is one of the most diverse, dynamic environment in the country, and also one of the most unequal. And, again, that's not naturally occurring. And that was true before that man descended an escalator at Trump Tower. But all these things have been exacerbated and worsened, certainly under this administration. So I try to not allow myself to be distracted by the online vitriol and the harassment and the credible death threats, but to focus instead on the policy violence and do something about that. And then I have to say this, because we are in September. This is Alopecia Awareness Month. And I do just want to give a shout out, to all my sisters. We're, 6.7 million strong, I think, men, women, and children living with alopecia, women disproportionately, Black women disproportionately. And I will just say that I receive a very unique kind of vitriol, that I've made a decision to not wear a wig and to enter these spaces with this melanin crown. It makes many people very uncomfortable because it disrupts and challenges all sort of societal norms about what is professional, about what is feminine, about what is pretty. But I still firmly believe that in honoring the tradition of my ancestors and Black women, that I'm not here just to occupy space, I'm here to create it. And so I hope, as a Black woman living with alopecia and navigating the world in that way, that I'm doing that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, and thank you for that shout out as well. You talked a lot initially about all of us coming together and doing the work, because it's not just one person. It's going to take all of us in a united front. What would you say for those of us who are just getting started to be involved in politics or thinking about being involved in politics? Where would we go to get more information? Where would we go to get support or guidance in that process? You know, would we need to fundraise? And if so, where would we go for that? Like, what could you say to those of us who are here on this call and those who are going to be privy to this conference later on down the road? What can you say to anyone who is interested into stepping in that role in any form as far as how to get started and how to get the support they need to be successful?
To run for office?
Yes. To get to think it, or any to run for office, but also to get involved in a more visible way in politics in general. So I would say both.
So first, let me just say that I think that in the narrative of civic engagement, that we often define it as two bookends, which is to run for office and then is to vote for people. And there's a lot in the middle there. And so I want people to consider that as well, because while we've made great strides in actualizing leadership parity when it comes to gender and race and who's on the ballot, we need to be just as committed to the people behind the people on the ballot. And so, you know, we need to be intentional about succession planning for these seats, because we often have a vacuum in leadership. We need to cultivate and to train Black women that know how to be fundraisers, that know how to write policy, that know how to write a field strategy, that know how to write a communications plan. We need all of that. And so I want to give a shout out to Emerge America. I was an original board member for Emerge Massachusetts, and they have an incredible track record of both the recruiting of women of color specifically, and them going on to get elected. So it's a great training vehicle. The Collective PAC, one of the few Black PACs that we have, they do a Black campaign school. They're a tremendous resource. I want to give a shout out to Higher Heights for America. I'm a founding circle member of that. The shorthanded definition for them is that they're Emily's List for Black women. Okay, they are, you know, unapologetically committed to raising money, to training, to supporting, to amplifying the voices of Black women candidates, and answering any questions that you might have if you're ruminating on running. So those are the things that I would lift for right now. But I just want people to know that if you're interested in electoral politics, again, you need to limit yourself to running and voting. You know, there's so much in between. We need aides. Black Lives Matter, Black staffers matter. You know, the electeds get a lot of credit, but I was in it for 16 years, and I know the power of someone that's, you know, pulling the elbow of a member and whispering in their ear and amplifying a lived experience that goes on to be central to a policy that's written. So we really need to be in every single aspect of this. And then finally, you can be a movement builder. You know, I gave a speech at something recently, and someone asked for something tangible they could do other than the census or voting. And I said, you know, we live in a food apartheid system. We're living with the co-structural morbidities of a food apartheid system, which has contributed to higher health disparities and why we're more vulnerable to COVID-19 and have higher rates of infection, hospitalization, and death. And I said, get committed to urban farming, you know, start a garden. And that's what they did. So it really is like bloom where you're planted. Do what you can where you are with what you have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everyone has a role to play in the movement. You know, so I can't find her name, the young sister that sang a song. That was a beautiful, beautiful song. Was a part of this conference. You know, we all have a role to play. Some people are going to sing a freedom song. Some people are going to make food and feed the foot soldiers. You know, some people are going to pick up a bullhorn. Some people are going to stand in a pulpit. We all have a role to play.
Thank you for your remarks, Congresswoman Pressley. I'm wondering if you can speak to us a little bit about efforts to end the war on drugs. We know that it's increasingly leading to incarceration of Black women, particularly mothers, and separating families through the child welfare system. In light of the button that you're also wearing, is this something that you can comment on to us today?
Well, you know, this is why we have legislation like the MORE Act and other things that have been focused on cannabis justice. It's why I introduced the People's Justice Guarantee Resolution, which would decriminalize low-level offenses, decriminalize substance use, mental health, homelessness, and really get us to, you know, we have to deconstruct and then build something new that centers, we have to be radical. Angela Davis said, like, to be radical is to get to the root of something. So we need to get to the root of it. And, we have a system right now that is punitive, that treats trauma with trauma. I'll give an example. My father, who is today a published author and a professor, a retired professor, college professor, he was incarcerated. He was in and out of the criminal legal system for some 14 years. And that is because he suffered great traumas growing up in a foster care system, and he self-medicated with substance use. The healthcare system failed my father. The criminal legal system failed my father. My father should not have had to be incarcerated in order to get on a pathway to sobriety and healing. Now, once that happened, he was able to get on a pathway to making his full contribution to the society, and he's gone on to do great things. But what my father deserved was on-demand, culturally competent treatment for his substance use, not to be for his trauma, to be treated with more trauma. So my legislative response as far as the war on drugs is my People's Justice Guarantee, which calls for a number of things like repealing the 1994 crime bill, abolition of the federal death penalty, sentencing reform, addressing the push-out crisis. And please, I hope you'll look it up. I don't know if my aide is in this chat, but we can send you more about the People's Justice Guarantee. It is a radical reimagining of our criminal legal system. And by many projections, it could get us to about 80% plus decarceration. It decriminalizes sex work. It's a radical reimagining.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Absolutely. Another question coming in from the chat takes us back to the BLM movement just slightly. And it talks
I'm sorry. One more thing I need to say that's also in the People's Justice Guarantee and also fits with the button that I'm wearing, Free Black Mamas, is we have to end the cash bail system. That is another situation where we have folks that are, pre-trial detainees. We've been pushing for their decarceration in the midst of COVID, certainly, because we know that, these are not places, they're not hospitals, and it's a petri dish for a virus like COVID-19 to thrive. So we've been pushing for the decarceration right now of the 10% of the population that is incarcerated, many of whom are elderly, have underlying conditions. I can't believe I have to advocate for the decarceration of incarcerated, of pregnant and incarcerated women, but I have to. I can't believe we have to introduce bills that say, please don't shackle a pregnant incarcerated woman to a bed while she's in delivery, but I have to legislate humanity. And so another one of those things that we call for is ending the cash bail system, because it is punitive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I do want to take a moment and say, I don't know if you're following the chat, but there's a lot of very positive remarks about the melanin crown, how beautiful you are, how grateful people are.
Thank you, y'all. I'm in my feelings right now because my ring light isn't working, so I don't have any good lighting this morning. So.
No, you look wonderful. Thank you. And so we have time, I think, for maybe one more question, and I'm going through this. And so, so this question really has to do with the African-American religious establishments and the LGBTQIA movement, and how we can potentially work to get religious establishments to see the LGBTQ movement as allies and not necessarily something to fight against, but in a way to embrace it in a political way to help us with our mission moving forward?
Okay. I think we're making strides in that. Again, that's one of the things that I have been, most inspired by with the BLM movement, is that it is a movement that is inclusive and that is intersectional. I think for a long time, our organizing has been very siloed. And so people did not see that their freedoms and destinies were tied. But I have seen a shift in that regard, that people that I would not have expected to be on the front lines of trans rights are the same people also showing up at a protest or demonstrating or pushing legislation. And they are doing that around criminal justice reform. They're doing that around immigrants' rights. They're doing that around reproductive justice and our bodily autonomy. But that has not always been the case. Each sort of, however you identify, each constituency had sort of been left to their own traumas and their own oppression. And now there's an understanding that, again, our freedoms and our destinies are tied, and we have to be, committed to each other's collective liberation. And I see that happening in faith spaces as well.
Thank you. And one final question. There is, and you may or may not be aware of this, there is a parade of sorts that will be happening tomorrow. And essentially, it is a parade. It will be Trump supporters decorating their vehicles, with the signs and the flags, and that's all fine and good. But what they're targeting is they're going to be targeting what they consider liberal enclaves. And the purpose is to trigger. And so in the advertisement of this parade, there's going to be an award given for the car that has the most triggering message. And that was exactly what it said, the most triggering message. And that took me back. So I've been sitting with that for a little bit. And it took me back to the statement that you made earlier about joy being an act of resistance as well, and about wearing the yellow, and about finding that light despite all of this heaviness and darkness. And I'm just wondering if you can leave us with a few words of encouragement around that, because they will be in our local communities, and again, with the point of triggering various individuals.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I would say is that we have to hold space for our very legitimate righteous rage. And we have to be radical and bold in our pursuit of a more equitable and just world. But we also have to hold space for our radical joy and healing. And the other thing that's important about that is very often, we'll repeat that adage, you can't pour from an empty cup. That's true. But I don't want you to be radical in your joy and your healing just to fortify you to do more work. I want you to create space to be radical in your joy and your healing, because you are entitled to be whole and well. And so that's what I would leave you all with. And I won't dictate to you how to arrive there. It's different for everyone. One of the ways that I inform joy is through affirmations. One of the ways that I inform joy is through a cup of tea, spending time with my daughter, reading some Audre Lorde. It's different for everyone, but find that for yourself and protect it fiercely. So hold space for the righteous rage, hold space for our radical and bold pursuits in the name of a more equitable and just world, and then also hold space for your radical joy and healing. And so far as those parade goers, I would just trigger them right back and just say Breonna Taylor. Just say her name. Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, George Floyd, just keep, that triggers them. That triggers them because they want to silence us. But Audre Lorde taught us, right? One of our greatest teachers in that. Your silence will not save you. It will not protect you. So we have to continue to speak up, to speak out, and to stand in and to honor that tradition of our ancestors of being the truth tellers. Keep telling the truth.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. We're a few minutes ahead, but there are no more questions in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have me back when my ring light works. So you can appreciate these cheekbones my mama gave me. Okay?
I appreciate it. The chat is full of it. The chat is full of appreciations.
You're absolutely beautiful, so no need to worry.
And your lighting is great.
Hassan here. You don't need a ring light, Congresswoman.
Thank you, Senator.
You look great.
I'm with my family, so I'm having fun with y'all. But thank you so much.
Yeah, you look really good. The lighting is great. And I said in the chat, I compliment God give you such a nice, sweet shaved head.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I'm glad you laughed. You paused for a minute. I thought maybe you might not have liked that comment, but I
figured no, not at all. Not at all. All right. Appreciate you all. Love you fiercely. Take care.
Thank you again.
Very much.
All right. So we are coming up on a video presentation at 1 o'clock, and it's going to be called My Crown by Katia Fenister. And then we'll have our next activist, Royalyn Edwards, presented in a video as well. Our final panelist for this conference, our final panel, excuse me, for this conference will start at 1:15. It is called Moving It Forward, the Next Generation of Black Female Activists. And so if you're not going to be on for the video presentations and the activists, please come back at 1:15, where the moderator will begin opening remarks and introductions.
Dr. Petty, maybe you'll tell everybody who you are.
Oh, I am so sorry. That would have been a good thing to start with. So hi, everyone. Nadine Petty. I am the Associate Vice President for Community, Equity, and Diversity at the University of New Hampshire, the Chief Diversity Officer. I am new to New Hampshire. I moved here from Iowa with my partner, and I've been in my position since August 10th. So very new to New Hampshire, obviously very new to the institution, but not new to the work. I've been in education for over 20 years, and higher ed specifically for 14. When I was at the University of Iowa, I was running a diversity center there. So yes, and so I'm happy to be here, happy to be back on the East Coast. I have family here, which was part of the motivation for the move. And I'm just looking forward to being able to engage with you all eventually, hopefully soon, face to face, as we hope the pandemic ends soon, so we can kind of get back to normal. So thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for engaging. We look forward to seeing, we're not having a breakout room again just because the time's not allowing it, but we still have more conference to come. So we'll see you at 1 o'clock for, we talked about Black Women's here, just a short presentation from Katia. Thank you so much.